sample of a gun background check. Gun background checks are used to enable eligible gun buyers to purchase guns. They protect people by preventing them from harm by not putting firearms into the hands of the wrong people.
Gun background checks are a dilemma because they ensure who is able to purchase a firearm or not, and whether or not a firearm is placed in the wrong hands of an individual. With gun background checks, a person has to answer a series of questions regarding their background, criminal record, medications, etc. Through these questions, the cashier can be notified if the buyer has the proper authority to purchase a firearm. Without these, any person can buy a gun easily without letting others know of their criminal record, mental health, background, etc., which would most likely put other innocent people in danger. Although gun background checks can be seen as a violation of privacy with some of the questions regarding background, another reason that these checks are seen as not the best thing could be that citizens who seem to be able to own a gun are said not to be, maybe because of a felony of some sort that doesn't have to do with violence, for example, which can display a violation of the Second Amendment rights in the Constitution. We believe that there should be background checks on guns in the United States. Although there are many different components of a background check, we wanted to focus on the medical illness portion of the background check form. Recently, the Senate tried to pass a bill expanding background checks on guns, but it failed. From our research, we found out that 54 people voted yes and 64 voted no.
One dilemma they came across was the aspect of recording a mental illness in a background check. There are over 1 million ways to classify a mental illness. From a trusted science and health website, we found out that, quote, a mental illness can be defined as a health condition that changes a person's thinking, feelings, or behavior, or all three, and that causes the person distress and difficulty in functioning, end quote. Sometimes it is interesting to note that it is technically against the law to sell guns to people with severe mental illness. The background check system can sometimes make errors on whether or not the dilemma is actually classified as one, which makes it harder to enforce the law. For example, only a legal licensed gun dealer has to enforce a background check, but there are also the private gun dealers out there that don't require a background check from the buyer right away, and so they can't really tell if they actually, they aren't aware of the mental illness. The law also has narrow classification on defining a mental illness. This means it doesn't allow gun sales to people that have been classified for a mental illness through court or have been driven toward a mental institution. This means that the system can be indecisive sometimes and can overlook dangerous and disturbed people who don't have a paper trail of a mental illness.
We believe that the dilemma is that the Senate couldn't draw a line on the classifications of mental illnesses, and it was too hard to expand the background checks for guns because sometimes mental illnesses are under or overclassified. Also, gun background checks are a dilemma because the checks can possibly prevent eligible gun buyers from purchasing guns or ineligible gun buyers from purchasing guns. With the medications and prescriptions area of the form, people who have been prescribed to an antidepressant medication once, for example, could be seen as someone who is a responsible medication taker, but they could overdose on these and use guns irresponsibly and cause harm. While on the other hand, if someone who is prescribed to an antidepressant often and uses it responsibly cannot own a gun because they could be seen as an irresponsible medication taker and use their firearms irresponsibly, causing harm.
This part of the gun background check can be seen as iffy because the government does not necessarily know for a fact how responsible a person being prescribed to a medication is. Thus, by preventing any person who has ever been prescribed to a medication from owning a firearm can make a lot of citizens of the United States not have guns, a source of self-defense. On the other hand, by letting all people who have prescribed to a medication have the ability to own a firearm, can possibly put a firearm into the hands of the wrong person who will cause harm.
Our ideal gun background check would include a prescription section where an individual would add what medications they have been prescribed to their whole life and how often they are prescribed to them. They would also include a medical record of these things in order to prove it. A mental illness section should also be included where the person writes down if they see a therapist or psychiatrist and how often they see them. This would include a record to prove these things as well. Also, every cashier should make sure that everyone who attempts to buy a gun has a permit and license in order to make the purchase legal.
Here are some polls we found related to background checks. This issue is very controversial in politics right now and is heavily debated back and forth in the government.